Hi and welcome to Rather Done Than Perfect with me, Kim Söderlund. Today we're gonna batch paint 20 orcs. It's a really long video, so I will cut this short and get straight to it. One thing that's very important when you're gonna do a batch painting like this is to make sure that you have a big surface to work on. And I'd like to zone it in, so I have a work area and 2 zones to put miniatures and 1 dedicated spot where I only have my paints. And what I also like to do is that I move miniatures from one zone to another. So I move them from left to right or right to left. And every time I move a model, I just apply one single paint. So I paint all the green, all the blue, all the white, and so on. So let's go to the process then. First of all, we will rattle can all of it. I will do the same colors as with the Warboss. It's Macragge blue. This is just an example knob that I used, nothing special. And here I just want to show you the angle I usually use. It's a pretty sharp angle from the top. If you rattle can outside, remember that wind can blow the paint into places you don't really want it, but you want quite a heavy coverage so that you don't miss any surface. And all that done, let's go to the paints. We will start off with orc flesh, like last time. This will be applied onto all the skin, of course, nothing crazy there. The only thing is that we will do the same technique as we did on the Warboss. We will first apply the paint, and then we will push it away using our brush before it's dried. And that gives a quite nice little highlight on the top of the head. You can do it on above the eyes, on the chin. And I've also tell you a little trick that I learned during this painting session. If you roll your brush while you are putting away the paint, then the bristles catches more of the paint, so it will be easier to control when you do it. As I mentioned before, we will now paint all the green on all the 20 boys. It's quite a long process, but it is absolutely the fastest. And we always remember to move models from one side of our painting station to the other. Don't start mixing them up, because then it will get confusing in the later stages when you have more colors on your miniatures and you're not quite certain which miniatures actually have gotten paint on them. As you might expect, this is an endurance race. Now we don't have that many miniatures to paint, it's only 20. But I would suggest that you put on some nice tunes or listen to a podcast or something while you paint. It's very important to stay motivated, because that is how you get the job done. And by getting the job done, of course, we mean get miniatures on the table. When it comes to painting batch paints like this and speed paints, then never try to use a technique that you haven't already mastered. Or you don't really need to master it, but you need to have a fundamental understanding of what you're doing. When you have the fundamentals in, then go ahead, batch paint 100 orcs at a time if you want to. By the end you will have mastered that single technique. But if you want to experiment and try to figure something new out, then this is not the way for you. Then you should try to copy some great painter like Squidmar or some other guy out there. When you return to painting the skin in a later stage, you can think about interesting details you can add to the skin. Me personally, I would probably add a little bit of purples in the shadow to make it a little bit more interesting to look at. And I would probably also do some white spots using Wraithbone or maybe some other whitish color to make them a little bit spotty. I think that would look very interesting. I will of course put up a video when I do the skin for the second round. I know most painters are really bad at painting a miniature once and then they say, oh, I will improve this in the future. but they never return to improve on that miniature in the future. But you really should, because that is how you get great looking miniatures and not just decent looking miniatures. One thing most Ork players don't do, and I didn't either, is to play with what colors you actually use for the skin. I use the standard issue green because that's what most people paint with, and I think that would be the most interesting thing to show people, that you can paint this really quickly. But if I would make something that I wanted to win a best in show or a best painted, then I would start with changing the skin tone. Maybe I would use a much like colder color, like I painted in turquoise, and have this dark turquoise contrast instead of the ordinary standard green. It will still be green because turquoise have some green in it, and it will make it a little bit more interesting, and it will make your army feel a bit more unique. Now the first big step is done, so now we will go on to painting the cloth using Skeleton Horde, another contrast paint that I learned to love. We will do the same technique here. We will apply the Skeleton Horde to the entire shirt of the model, and then we will push away the colors from the hunchback and from the shoulders. We will also use it to paint other areas that we will want to have a little bit of a lighter brown, such as the straps on their hands and some other minor details. When you start painting details like this, try to find all of them and paint them at once. It's not a big deal if you just forget to paint some of them, you can return to them in a later step, but it's good if you've done it all, then you won't have to switch cans in the middle of your batch paint. voluptuous pink is then used to paint in the mouth. Try to get as much paint inside of the mouth as possible. Don't mind if you get some of it on the teeth. You can fix that in a later stage. Then I took Wraithbone to clean up the teeth. I got this fixation that I needed to finish the face, but it was a mistake. I will explain later why. But I lose a few minutes doing this, not a big deal. But this is why you don't need to care about voluptuous pink ending up on the teeth. You can of course highlight the teeth even more with a brighter white like skull white, but we will not do this time. Orcs have filthy teeth, so I don't really see the point of making them all sparkly white. Then it was time for Agrath Earthshade to shade some of the skeleton horde from earlier on the cloth. That's just to give it a little bit more extra contrast. So I paint this next to basically any kind of strap or armor piece where I want a little bit more depth and shadow. You don't need to be that careful because you will add additional paints to all the straps and armor in later stages. So just paint it, don't be careful. You will be able to fix it afterwards. In worst case scenario, you can take some Wraithbone and clean it up afterwards on the cloth as well. Now I pick up Wraithbone again. This is to highlight the cloth on the hunch and on the shoulders. This is what I meant earlier with me making a mistake. I made an unnecessary pot change. I could have just waited with cleaning up the teeth and stopped fixating on the face and just added Agrath Earthshade, let that dry, and then open the Wraithbone pot just once. Because pot changes take time and we want to cut down time as much as possible. I know it sounds a bit extreme, but I kind of like pushing painting to the limit, like how much can I do in as little time as possible. And here begins the next very long step. It's the Talazar blue on all of the armor pieces and some of the weapon parts. Not much to say here, it's just adding the paint to the armor plates. You're not going to do anything fancy like pushing it around to get special shading effects. We use contrast here just to save the time and get the correct color on the correct spot. Later we will anyway highlight it and weather it and things like that, so it doesn't really matter if it looks a little bit boring right now. An interesting problem I had with the Talazar Blue was that some of the orcs almost had no armor on them. Like the bare-chested guys, they only had a little bit of blue armor on their feet. So what I would recommend if you have more time, that's to add like face paint and war paint to the models that match the color of your army. But if you just like the normal green skin, then just go with that. But if you want to tie your army together a little bit more, then just add some war paints or something similar to make them fit with the rest of the army. Next we have Gorgranta Fur, probably one of my favorite new brown colors from Games Workshop. We'll use this to paint all of the suspenders, belts, pouches and all of other things we want to be leather. I thought this was gonna be a quick step, but I soon realized that these orcs were wearing pretty much about the same amount of leather as an average bondage enthusiast, so it took way longer than I thought it would. At this point in the session I was about to lose my mind. I had been sitting for, I think it was 4 or 5 hours non-stop alone in my hobby room painting. The only breaks I had was for food and fetching some water and putting up some new lights here in the hobby room. I can't stress enough how important it is that you paint with someone or entertain yourself somehow. You can't see it because I've sped up the footage so much, but I could feel how I was slowing down just because my mind was wandering. It wanted to do something more stimulating than just applying a single paint on the same type of model over and over again. So it's very important to have fun with someone. Painting is supposed to be fun. This isn't that fun, to be honest. It's more kind of like running a marathon. It's really fun when you're done and you see the result and you go like, yeah, I made it. But the journey there is an endurance race. It's painful, but it's very giving when it's done. black Templar will then be painted on the pants and any area that we want to have black, or that we want to hide because we don't really care about painting it. Later I would actually like to highlight it with a bit of Eshin Grey on the top of the legs, and maybe even a final highlight with Dawnstone or a similar more bright grey color. But for now we're running out of time, so I will just paint them black and that will be it. Elysian green will then be painted on the sticky bombs. Talisor blue is here used to paint the back plates on the orcs. I was thinking about painting them black, but I changed my mind, so I wanted some more blue into the army. Lead belcher will then be used to paint all of the guns and axes and all other metal parts on the miniature. I was gonna paint the guns a few different colors, but due to time constraints I decided on just painting the entire gun silver. It's not that beautiful, but it actually works when you have like 40 or 50 boys just standing in a huge blob. I like to call that the blob factor. If you paint something decent, not great, not bad, just decent, and you paint like 50 or 60 or 70 of them and put them next to each other with a theme behind them, then they look a lot better together than they would ever do apart. Orcs, admechs nowadays, when they play horde armies, all horde armies can use this to their advantage. You don't need to have a masterpiece like Space Marines, where we have very few models. Just paint a decent standard over and over again, and the army will in its entirety look very nice on the table. Now we're going into the final detail steps. We'll start off using skeleton ore, and this will be used to paint all of the nuts and bolts on the weapons, painting next to white armor plates, shading white spikes, and pretty much just adding filth and a little bit of depth to all of the white areas on the model. May also be used to just add a little bit of extra shadow here and there. Color that need no introduction, Nuln oil. It will be just splattered all over all the weapons and all of the metal parts. No real thought went into it. By now I was so exhausted that I just wanted to get finished. I knew that I was already running out of time, so I just needed to get everything done as quick as possible. And I think you sort of kind of can have the same mentality Null oil kind of makes the job for you. If you put some work into it, then it can look really nice, but with no effort at all, it will just look perfectly fine. I also wanted to shade the armor parts, like just in the joints of the armor parts with null oil, but I realized that I was already out of time, so I skipped the step entirely. It's not necessary to make it look okay, but a little bit of null oil would have made it look so much better. Final shading with Aggressive Earthshade on the grenades, and other parts I want a little bit darker. I also was starting to cut out some transfers to apply them to the miniatures just to add a little bit of extra detail. But I realized I'm already out of time, so I skipped it and just painted some details using Wraithbone instead. Sometimes freehanding is quicker than transfers, sometimes they're not. So just adjust. When I return to the orcs, I will most likely add some transfers just for some extra details. If you're still with me, thank you so much for watching to the end. This was a massive project and I'm very impressed that you had the endurance to sit through almost 40 minutes of me painting 20 orcs in one sitting. It was an endurance race, took a little bit more than 7 hours, but thank you. And a special thank you to our new subscribers, Eorek, Adrian Sjöström, Mickey D, Pad265 and Kurt Mifsud Bonisi. Thank you so much. Like and subscribe. Follow me on whatever social media you want to, and see you next time. Bye bye.